Welcome to a conversation with Rayanne Thane. I'm so excited to be here interviewing her about her book, The Lost Book of First Loves, her newest book in a long list. Rayanne Thane is a New York Times and USA Today, Wall Street Journal, and number one Publishers Weekly bestselling author of more than 70 beloved novels. Known for her heartfelt, uplifting stories set in small towns, Rayanne's books have been praised as poignant and sweet, with beautiful, honest storytelling. A former journalist, Rayanne brings emotional depth and authenticity to her romance novels. Many are inspired by the stunning mountains of northern Utah where she lives with her family. She's been honored with a Career Achievement Award and recognized as a pioneer of romance, and her fans agree Rayanne Thane just keeps getting better with every book. So, Rayanne, welcome, welcome.
Thanks so much. I'm so excited to talk to you.
I am excited to talk to you too. And here's this thing we'll just launch us into the interview with this question. Does it ever get old?
It does not get old. Every time a book comes out, it feels brand new. It feels like I've not done this before. It's exciting. And I would have to say, every time I sit down to start a book, it feels brand new too. You feel like you're relearning the process with every single book. So, no, it does not get old. There are certain things that I think, oh, I'm not sure if I can keep doing this with enthusiasm and excitement, but most of it is just wonderful. And it's a dream come true. It's what I dreamed of since I was in high school. So I'm just so happy that I'm living the dream that I wanted to do from many, many years ago.
That's so exciting. And the fact that it doesn't get stale, it's kind of like I would imagine having not written books as at the great, volume that you have. It's like the first time you have a baby and you wonder if some women wonder, will I be able to love the second one as much and the third one as much? And then you always find, of course you do. Of course love is exponential. So do you feel that way a little bit about your books?
I do feel that way. I'm actually working on book 78. So this has been a long journey, but it really does feel like, every time I think I can't do this again, I just don't know what I have new to bring to the story. And then you get into the story and it's different people, it's different plots, it's different storylines. So that keeps it interesting and exciting. And then the readers are consistent and the readers are so wonderful that every time I sit down, I just think I want to be able to give them something, a gift again. So even if it's just a gift of a few hours of escape, that's the gift that I want to give my readers.
I love that. I love that. So let's talk about Lost, Book of First Loves. So this is an emotional story about identity, family secrets, family connection. What inspired you with this story?
So actually a couple of things. I have a list of ideas that I keep in a folder and I go through that when I'm getting ready to start a new book. And in this particular case, I had two ideas that I've been thinking about for a long time and those are the things that I put together. And the one is I knew somebody I on social media I read a post years and years ago about someone who had the same heart condition that I give to my heroine. And I'm going to get it wrong, but so I wrote it down again. So because I had to relook at it every single time I refer to it, but it's called catecholaminergic polymorphic ventricular tachycardia. So, and it's something that hits people in usually it might manifest in childhood, but lots of times it's when you're an adult that before you even know that you have this. It's basically an irregular heart rhythm. You end up having to get a cardioverter implanted when you have it. And so I like the idea of somebody who has I should go back. The woman who wrote on the social media talked about how what a journey this was to find out that she had this and now she has this thing inside of her keeping her alive and how hard it was. And I was really touched by it. I kept that whole post that she wrote thinking I could write a story about this someday. And so, as I was looking through, I just thought, wouldn't it be great if it was like an athlete, a woman who's very physical in her life, who was a college runner who runs and is extremely healthy and actually works for, she helped found a fitness tech company. And what if she's the one who now suddenly has to face the fact that she's not, she has this new condition and things are different than what she expected. And so that was the main idea. And then I also love the idea of sisters finding themselves later in life. And that also comes from family. My husband is adopted and through DNA tests has traced his family and found them and has great relationship now with his birth family on his mother's side, and it's been just a wonderful journey for him, and to see that evolution has been great. And so I like that. I've touched on DNA things in previous books too, but in this particular case, it was someone finding out through a DNA test she has a sister, a half sister she knew nothing about. So what's the story there? Why doesn't she know her? Why, what was the history between her and her father and this other woman's mother? And so that was really fun to kind of combine both of those things.
Well, and that's an interesting thing too, because the relevance, I mean, it's so today, right? With all the access we all have to DNA testing and genetic testing and things like that, that people are finding
Right.
family that, through adoption it might be more intentional, but some people are finding family they didn't even know existed, right? So
Very much so. There are no secrets anymore. So no family secrets. And so
yeah.
all these things are coming out in many different forms and iterations. And so I like the idea of exploring that a little bit in depth and what that might mean, especially for Juniper, this woman who suddenly has a heart attack and suddenly realizes everything she thought she knew about her life and herself is not what she thought. And now she has to sort of reinvent herself, rediscover who she really is, and open herself to these new relationships that are people who want to love her, and she's always sort of been self-contained and keeping people out. And so it's kind of her journey into how she can open her heart.
Yeah. And you started touching on the next question I had, which was kind of, did you start with a plot idea, a character, or something else? So it seems like a combination of things. You sort of started with an event or a condition
Right.
and then grew things out of that. So how did you come at this in terms of building character and plot and weaving all of those things together? Because it's kind of a lot to manage in one book.
So my books always start with characters. That's the heart of it for me. It's coming up with the characters that are interesting enough, compelling enough that I'm willing to spend myself, months and months in their heads and trying to get their story out onto the page. So in this case, it was the characters. I came up with Juniper. I came up with Beck, who is her love interest, and I love coming up with the secondary love interest, which is her sister and her sister's best friend from childhood, and they end up, having a relationship as well. And so that it started with the characters, and I'm very much a plotter, and I think ahead quite a few steps in order to sort of weave everything together. I have a plot group that we meet once a year at a beach house in Southern California, and we help each other plot our books, and they offer me amazing suggestions and ideas. I give the idea, I give the characters, I say this is what I want, where I want the characters to be in the beginning, or I want them to be at the end, and then my writing friends help me sort of figure out how we're going to get there in a logical way. And so then I just basically plot it as three different books. I plot the story of the main hero and her journey and his journey together, and then the secondary hero and heroine and their journey together, and then in this case it was the heroine and her sister's story, and I had to plot that with turning points for each one and climaxes and black moments and each one, and then I figure out the scene order. I write down all the scenes that need to be in each character's point of view and in each storyline, and then I figure out where should I put them together, how should I put them together, and I actually write them on index cards on an app on my iPad and move them around if it doesn't work, and it's a lot of fun. That I like the planning process. That part is really fun for me.
So do you ever get far enough down a path that you think you've nailed it and you know exactly where you're going, and then something one of the characters does surprises you?
I would have to say that's only happened to me about 78 times in the 78 books I've written. Every single book, someone takes me by surprise, and I'm a writer who writes very much rough drafts. I just get it out onto the page and it makes no sense to anybody but me, and there's a lot of gaps, and I say that there's going to be some great dialogue here or really passionate kiss here or things like that. I write basically an outline. After I write the original outline, I do, I fill it in a little bit more. And so, from that point, there's always a point where I say, "Oh, that's why that character did that way back many, many chapters ago." And then I have to kind of go in and add those little things in, and
Right.
it just adds depth to the story, those things that you discover. It's a discovery process. Every book is a discovery process.
And so that really would be where layering comes in, when you discover these little things and then you make it, it becomes a deeper character earlier on once you kind of figure out those layers.
Right, exactly. And then you think of, okay, so if this is what they're dealing with right now, how can I add seeds to that earlier in the story? Now that I know who they are and what their motivation is and what their problems were all along, how can I add, a few things into the story to make that make sense? And that's where I try to add like a scent or a touch thing. I try to bring in the senses so that those things sort of help with the layering as you're writing the story.
Yeah, I love that. So let's talk a little bit about the characters, since that's where you usually start your books. So let's talk a little bit about both of the main characters. Give us a little snippet of who they are, what motivates them. We've talked somewhat about their conflict. I mean, clearly there's a conflict with a health condition and an athlete, and anybody who's ever done anything athletic or physical can understand the loss. That's a grief you've got to go through, right? That's a completely different sense of self. So
Right.
give me a little bit more about these characters and what is it that they're struggling with? What drives them?
Right. So Juniper, I consider her kind of the main heroine to the story. She is this woman, go-getter, high-powered executive. She runs a hugely successful tech company with the two-part best friends from college who founded it with her. She's very passionate about what she does. She loves helping people be healthier. Suddenly she finds out her life is not what she thought it was going to be. When she finds out she has this heart condition, she has to have
Right.
basically a pacemaker implanted into her chest so that will keep her alive. And she's aware of it all the time. She touches it all the time and is aware now
Mhm.
that this is keeping her heart beating. And she died basically in the beginning of the book. That's not any secret. It's the first line of the whole
Right.
book is the day she died. Juniper Connelly had just finished firing her latest assistant. So, she basically died. And she spent her most of her life, well, adult life anyway, alone. She and her mother were alone together. Her father, the man she thought was her father, died when she was very young. And so she and her mother were this self-contained unit. Her mother died when she was 16 and she was in foster care for the last 2 years. And then was just this self-contained independent woman. And now she has to sort of open her heart to other people and heal her heart physically, also heal her heart
Mhm.
emotionally through the story. And then her half sister Allison, she's 25 years old. She's just graduated from law school. She's trying to figure out what she wants to do with her life. She finds out after her father's unexpected death. I should add, I haven't mentioned this part, but their father was a literary lion, much in the manner of Hemingway Steinbeck, and she loved him. They were very, very close. And her father unexpectedly dies 6 months before the story starts. She finds out after he died that she has this link to this other person, and it can only be close enough to be a half sibling of some sort. So she wants to find her. So she goes to work for Juniper at her company, thinking she takes an internship, thinking, well, I'll get to know her, then I'll tell her what I found, through this DNA testing. And that's sort of her mission and really what she wants. She wants to sort of reinvent her family now that her father's died. She needs to sort of reestablish a connection. She was an only child. She has her grandmother still alive, but she wants this sister in her life, and that's her goal. Then when her sister almost dies and she saves her life, basically they're bonded, and they start developing a friendship. She still is hesitant. Do I tell her? Do I not tell her? At what point do I tell her? And so that's basically the women in the story. If you want me to go into the men at this point as well, I can.
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay, so the two heroes. Beck is the hero for Juniper, and he was a successful prosecutor in Silicon Valley. She has a history with him, not her personally, but a dear friend had a history with a case that he refused to prosecute. So she is already, set up to not be very happy with him when she finds out he's here. Juniper ends up going with Allie to her father's writing cabin, basically to heal. And it's a huge ranch in Wyoming near Grand Teton National Park. And so they're in this beautiful ranch. She finds out he's their nearest neighbor. He was dear friends with the man she doesn't know as her father, but was always her favorite author. And so he is obviously has a presence in her life. He's very good friends with Allie as well. She doesn't want anything to do with him. And then gradually she starts to get to know him a little bit better. He has left his busy life because of some trauma that happened to him. He's now makes resin tabletops, something completely different from being a prosecuting attorney. So he has this craft that he creates these beautiful works of furniture for people. And she knew him from that, didn't realize it was him, the same person. And so she's intrigued by the process. And that's kind of their journey is him saying, there's so much more to you now. Yes, you have a heart condition, but that's not the sum total of you. There's so much more to you. and you still have much life to live. And as far as Allie, her best friend Xander, they've been best friends since elementary school, and he's like her rock, her person, as far as emotionally. She is starting to have more romantic feelings. She has been for some time, but she doesn't want to ruin their friendship by taking it to a place that maybe he doesn't want it to go. And so they go off on a camping trip into the mountains, a horseback riding trip into the mountains, and sort of both, she sort of realizes that, yeah, he had maybe these feelings all along for her. Is she willing to risk ruining their dear friendship that she relies on so much, for the chance of having something even more, rich and fulfilling?
Wow, that's great. I mean, so many layers, so many stories. That had to be hard to keep track of. And in terms of the relationship between the two women, I think that's one thing that is appealing to women as readers a lot of times to see these. I mean, everybody loves a good love story, I think for sure, but also having this relationship between two women grow and evolve. And how did you approach that? Because it is kind of fraught with a lot of things that could go wrong. A lot of reactions that may or may not be what the other expected, those sorts of things. So how do you come at that in terms of carrying this thread of this relationship through the book?
Right. And I guess the big thing between them is the secret. Allie knows the secret. June does not know the secret. And so it's, when is she going to tell her? Everybody's
Right.
pushing Allie to tell her, and she says she's not ready. She just had a heart attack. How can I tell her this now? And completely shake her life up, completely, rewrite everything that she thought she knew. And so she sort of introduces it in a way that, do you want to read my father's journals, who again was Juniper's favorite author, her mother's favorite author, for reasons that obviously, we find out they had a little love affair very when they were both very young, and that's how Juniper resulted. And so,
Mhm.
she's fascinated because she's always admired his books. His books are her favorite. She rereads them all the time. She wants to explore those nuances and the depth of his emotional journey, as he wrote in his journals. And so she loves the idea of reading his journals. So that's sort of the intro to them. And then Allie just never stops. She's a lot like a Labrador. She just keeps coming and wanting that affection. June is very prickly, not used to having someone like this in her life, but Allie just wants her so much to be a real sister. And then, obviously when she finally tells her, there's a big shocking revelation, and it's tough for June to find this out. But I loved writing their story. I love writing about strong women who develop these deep friendships. I love found family, and this is basically the epitome of found family. It's actual literal family, not just friends that become family. They become friends first, but Allison knows that they're family as well. And so I love
Yeah.
that idea of especially as adults, it's sometimes hard to find female friendships, and I'm lucky enough that I have four sisters, and so we have a very deep friendship, and we text each other all the time. We have a book club that meets once a month. We do a virtual book club, and so I love the idea of sisters who didn't know they were sisters and then find each other.
Hmm. Yeah, it is nice. And I think so many women can relate to that, whether you have sisters or not. I've got sisters too. But my business partner, the name of our umbrella company is Chosen Sisters. So I think it's a theme that women really relate to well, especially as we age and we value those things even more and more, don't you think?
Absolutely. Yeah, I'm lucky enough that I have my own sisters, but I also have found sisters as well that I
Yeah.
consider my sisters of my heart as well,
Yeah.
and love
Yep.
them
And
as
they
much.
all serve a different purpose a little
Yeah,
bit, right?
they do.
Yeah,
And we need them
absolutely.
all. We need them all.
We need them all. Absolutely. So let's talk a little bit about setting because you talked about the things you try to bring in with the senses and the sense and different things, but also the setting of Wyoming. Wyoming is such a I mean, it just evokes thoughts already without even having looked at the scenes in the book. So tell us what that meant to the story and why you chose to set it there and how that helped drive some of your characters and the stories and the relationships.
Absolutely. So Grand Teton National Park's one of my favorite places. We live
Mhm.
about 3 hours away from it, so we go up there quite often, and to Yellowstone because they're right next to each other. So I'm very familiar with that area. I actually work during college. I worked one summer up there as a maid at the at the Jackson Lake Lodge in Grand Teton National Park. So it's a place of my heart that I always love. And so I've written a few books that are set kind of in that area, and this one is is a little ways away, roughly based on, towns that are not exactly Jackson, but are, further to the east. And so that sort of was the idea of it. I love visiting those places. I love hiking in those places. My husband's done a lot more hiking than I have back in the backcountry, and he's shared lots of pictures and things with me. So just that idea, it just seems so wonderful to me of spending time in the mountains. So that to me was part of June's healing journey. She lives in Seattle, which is also a beautiful place, has beautiful surroundings and beautiful mountains, but there was something about coming to this ranch in Wyoming that provided the healing that she needed at that particular point in her life. Not just the people who were so warm and kind to her, but this lovely, serene place where she could find some peace that she desperately needed. So that's an important part of the book. And it's
Yeah, and it
fun to write something that I'm familiar with. My mountains that I live that are right by my house, I can walk into those and it's sort of the same feeling. I've got the same aspens and pines and wildflowers and all those things nearby. So it was fun for me to visit that in my books.
Oh yeah, and when you write about someplace you love, I would think that just makes it e easy and fun and nice. But having the two settings that are both beautiful in their different ways, but the escape of going somewhere else and having this vastness of the Wyoming, I imagine that provided some sort of, like you said, a healing location to just get away from the familiar and the known and the people who know you where you live and that kind of thing. Is that what you
It
would?
absolutely, and then it was also very challenging for June because she suddenly realizes I could have a heart attack again on this trail.
Mhm.
So she's afraid. So it does present a bit of an obstacle, and it was an opportunity for the hero to sort of help her see that she can still do these things. They go on a few hikes together, and that's a important part of the book where he helps her see, yeah, something's changed in you. It doesn't mean everything has to change. You can still have these adventures in the backcountry. There's still beauty out there for you to see and experience just because this little part of your life is a little bit different than you planned it to be. And again, all of us have things like that where we suddenly are faced with our own limitations or have family situations that sort of cause limitations. And I guess, to me, I love the idea of a setting providing an opportunity to see, yeah, okay, this is hard, but it doesn't have to be the end.
Well, and that actually leads to the next question that I was going to ask you, which is about the book exploring truth, grief, and healing. Um, so would you say that her hero is sort of a reflection back to her of who she is and who she still is and what she can still do and helps her see herself in a way that maybe the fear is holding her back from?
Right, absolutely. And
Mhm.
the other thing I liked about Beck is that he went through this grief process himself 5 years earlier. He lost his wife in a really tragic way that he feels responsible for. And so coming to Wyoming for him was a healing experience. And he
Mhm.
befriended, Carson, which is her father. Carson was his best friend, and he befriended him and showed him that he still has life to live, he creates these beautiful pieces of furniture, and he likes to use broken wood. And to me that was sort of a symbol of Juniper, because he uses wood that's diseased or has burls and scars and things like that, because they make the most beautiful tabletops with the way that he makes it. And so that again was a metaphor for June. She's broken in some ways, but there's still beauty there.
Yeah. So when you think about these themes that you've got, they're very strong and they're very deliberate. What do you hope a reader would walk away from after having read this book?
I really hope in all my books, I think the underlying message is that life is hard. Everybody's got something that we're dealing with, that we can't escape grief and loss and
Mhm.
sadness in life or disappointments. But that doesn't mean we can't go on and have a good life. We can't go on and find joy and peace and help other people and have an open heart to the world, as hard as it is sometimes and hard as it feels sometimes, when we're protective and self-protective and don't want to give those things to the world because we don't want to be hurt again. I think at some point I try to show in all my heroines and heroes that, yeah, it's scary, it's terrifying to risk like that, but the joy is so much worth the risk if we can just get beyond our fear.
Yeah, absolutely. And so to continue that point, do you feel like this is a running theme or a thread throughout most or all of the books that you write? Is this what you hope people gain from them as you write every one?
It really is. It really is. And I will say, not to be super personal, but that does come from experience. We have a son with severe disabilities. And, if you had told me 27 years ago that we'd still be dealing with this in 27 years and different challenges now, I would have said, I'm not strong enough for that. But it comes as you deal with it. You grow and change and our life is wonderful, as hard as it is, and as endless as caregiving can be, as many people who in the world caregive for someone else, or again have to deal with some kind of grief or some kind of physical limitation themselves. The world is still a beautiful place and it's still filled with joy. And we have these random joyful moments that just take the breath away. And I know that sounds cliche, but you just think, how is this? Sometimes when I go to places like the Tetons, I'll just say, how is this real? How is this the life that I'm living, that I get the chance to see these beautiful places and have these people around me that I love so much. And so that's kind of the message I hope. I hope when readers who whatever they might be dealing with in their own life read my books, I hope they gain a little bit of inspiration from my characters to face their own troubles a little bit with a little bit more grace maybe and a little bit more strength that they maybe didn't have before they started the book.
Yeah, that's really beautiful. And I think it's everything is about perspective, I think. And when you have that perspective of caregiving and struggling and thinking you weren't strong enough, but then finding out that you are. And as they say, sometimes you don't realize how strong you are until you don't have any other choice, right?
Right.
And so many of us have faced those kinds of experiences in life. And like you said, when you embrace that, I have like a running mantra in my life a lot of the times is just embrace your reality
Mhm.
because at some point you're gonna get through it and you're gonna be able to help somebody else get through theirs, right?
That's beautiful.
Yeah.
I absolutely agree. And my mantra is I can handle this. And I go
Hmm.
through that. I have to say it sometimes, a dozen times before I'll even think, okay, yes, I guess I can. Hospital stays and new diagnoses and things like that. It's a constant part of our life. And so you
Yeah.
find the strength wherever you can find it. And for me, much of that is through books. I absolutely love books. I love reading. I love writing. I love all of it. I love the idea of giving somebody the gift of a few hours away from the troubles that they might be dealing with. And so
Yeah.
that's because I have found that myself in my life, because that's been such an important part of my journey. And how what gets me through when I'm struggling, I can just read a good book and it takes me away for a little bit. And so the idea that I have the chance to give that to readers is such a gift to me.
Right. Well, and while doing that, not only are they escaping, but hopefully finding that inspiration
Right.
through the way that you tell the stories of the themes that you typically visit. I think it's a double whammy gift. Right?
Absolutely.
They can escape and be inspired. Um, so let's talk a little bit about how do you write about complex family dynamics? And we've touched on this. They resonate with you personally because of some of the things that you've experienced. But in telling universal truths, I mean, complex family dynamics. One of my children at one point, his young adulthood, said, "I've just decided everybody's family is crazy," and I thought, well. That's probably true. So it's relatable to most people, I would say, to have complex family dynamics. So how do you come at that when you're writing relationships and books?
Really, I come at it from the perspective that we all have our own journey in life. Everybody's been through something. Everybody, like you said, life is messy, life is hard, life is challenging, and our families sometimes are the cause of that, or the secrets that our families have kept, or the behavior from those secrets, has influenced us throughout the life. So I just try to think about who is this character, what created them, why do they act the way they do, what is their motivation, what are their wounds that they suffered in childhood or in adulthood, what is their romantic past that might have put them in a place that they're not at all, interested in that at this point in their life, or maybe they are, maybe that's a different perspective from a different character. So I try to dig deeply into who they are, what makes them tick, what pushes them to behave the way that they do. It's not always easy. Sometimes, again, as we talked about, I sometimes have to figure that out. Finally, after I finish the draft, that comes to me. One character journey might seem a puzzle to me, but I keep writing, and keep writing, and then suddenly I'm like, oh, that's why they're doing everything that they they are doing. Now I get it. Thanks for finally explaining it to me. We could have saved a lot of pain if I had only figured that out, 400 pages ago.
I think that's true in real life, though, sometimes when you're dealing with your people.
True,
If only I had figured
absolutely.
that out 5 years ago, I might have understood you better, right?
I think that's exactly right. You know, we might have a little more compassion if we could figure out some of the things that made people act the way they do in real life, as well as my characters.
Yeah, so much. So in term, let's shift a little bit into the practicality of your writing because you mentioned being a caregiver. Um, what is your writing routine like? So I would imagine it might be somewhat unpredictable sometimes. And so how do you 78, is that what you said, 78th book? How are you that prolific while dealing with the challenges of life?
Well, in fairness, that's 78 books over 30 years. So my first book came.
Still, it's still an accomplishment. Don't knock it.
Right. So I mean, I've been at it a long time, and I figured out a few little hacks here and there. You know, I try to write. Sometimes it's only in little fits and spurts, you know, but I can get a page or two done at a time, and if I can do that enough times throughout the day, I can meet my quota, which is I try to write 10 pages a day, 6 days a week. I usually take Sundays
Mhm.
off, and I try to write. You know, it doesn't always happen. It doesn't always work out that way, but that's sort of the underlying goal. And really, I just write when I get a chance. When I'm really pushing it on a deadline, if I'm like the last 2 months before a book is due and I realize I have much more to do than I have time to do, I start working at night, which is not my favorite. But after our son usually goes to bed quite early. We have three children. He's our middle, so I shouldn't say our son. We have two sons, but he's the one that takes the most work. And he goes to bed quite early. And once he's in bed, I usually will work for a couple more hours to sort of try to wrap things up. I'm lucky enough that I have an office next door, so that's I'm able to get out of the house and go to my office, which is really helpful, especially when our younger one was little. He's 22 now, but when he was young, he was very active and physical and had friends over all the time, and it was just hard to work amid that chaos. So I was really grateful for my home office next door. But I just, you know, when you're a writer, you're always working. That's the thing. The brain never shuts off, and so you're always looking at people and thinking, how could I put that in a book? That mannerism, that way they speak, different things the way they dress, how can I incorporate that into a story? So that's always there, and the idea machine is always kind of spinning. But the actual sitting down writing time, I try to get 10 pages a day, and that's my goal.
Okay, great. And so it sounds like you've kind of got to be disciplined with the way that your life is in order to make things work.
I do have to be disciplined, and that's why I think why I started plotting, because early in my career I didn't know anything about plotting. I didn't plot at all, and I would just sit down and try to get the story to come out. But I sort of was at a point where I knew I had such a limited time to write, so I'd spend the other times when I wasn't physically sitting down thinking about the book, trying to figure out the plot. And it helps me so much to know, okay, I know what scene I need to write today. I know where it needs to start, where it needs to end. That gives me a roadmap. I might take a whole different direction in the journey, but I'll end up where I needed to end up. And so that keeps me from panicking every time I sit down to write. There's still plenty of times I panic, but for the most part, it keeps me sort of sane as I sit down and try to get the words out onto the page. And so, it's you deal with what you have to deal with. Everybody's got, like I said numerous times, everybody's got something. We all have different challenges that we have to deal with. In my particular case, ours is sort of more obvious to the world just because, we drive a wheelchair van and we're pushing a wheelchair
Yeah.
where we go and things like that. But I know I'm not alone, and there are many people whose struggles are not nearly as apparent as ours are.
Yeah, I love that. So we've touched on this as well when you talked about the Facebook post you saw that gave you the idea for this heart condition. How do you keep your ideas fresh? I get the feeling, like you said, writers are observers. So what is your method for keeping track of all of these things? Do you keep notes in your phone? Do you keep a physical folder? Like where do you get all these fresh ideas and how do you store them?
So I have tried different methods over the years, and that's the problem. I have different notebooks in different places, but now it's on my phone. I keep an idea list on my phone, and the beauty of that is I can look at it on my desktop, I can look at it on my iPad, I can look at it wherever I need to come up with an idea. And it is there's something miraculous about coming up with an idea for a book, because especially when I have my plot group in February, often I have no idea what I'm going to be bringing to the plot group. And a few weeks before, I'm like, I got to come up with an idea. I'm usually working on a different book, trying to get that one done, so I'm not really ready for the next one yet. But I know I have to have something, and so I'll sit down and just think, okay, I got to come up with something. And to me, that is the miracle, that there's something that didn't exist before I sat down trying to think about it. By the time I come back from San Diego or Los Angeles, wherever we decide to have our little Southern Utah or Southern California escape, I have a fully formed idea that I know I can write. I just have to sit down and do it. And so it feels miraculous with every single book, the idea how it goes from nothing to something. And it is not, I wouldn't say it's ever easy. It's never been easy, but for me, it's easier if I plot it out ahead of time so that I have a roadmap and know where I need to go.
Yeah. And so that kind of leads us into the next thing about advice you would give to other writers, or especially less seasoned writers than you are. What what advice would you give in terms of plotting? I know not everybody's a plotter, some are the pansters, but especially when you're tackling dual points of view, I think that can often be a challenge. And you had several points of view in this book. What kind of methods and advice would you give in terms of keeping that straight and then bringing it all together?
I think the important thing for me is figuring out those turning points for the characters. Not everybody is a plotter, and many people don't need to plot. And I envy those people. I have friends who even write like suspense, and they don't even know who the bad guy is till they're almost done with the book. And that to me is like, oh my goodness, that makes me have a panic attack just thinking about that. But the thing is to sort of get to know your characters. They will tell you their story as you get to know them a little bit better, as you write in their point of view. It also really only comes from writing. Learning to write only comes from writing. Even if you feel like your first drafts are awful, my first drafts are horrible. I'd never show them to anyone. And most of my friends are the same. We just say, I tell my husband, burn everything after I die, because I don't want anyone to see anything unfinished that I've ever written because it's awful. But the joy, I guess, of having done it so many times is I know, okay, I can deal with this. I've done this before. If as long as I know the characters are, I can get there eventually. It might take me a little longer than I'd like it to, but I can get there eventually once I figure them out. And so, as far as keeping track, I really like having a pretty well-defined outline for myself with the note cards. That's very helpful. It helps me know what scene I need to write next. The app that I use on my phone is no longer sold on the App Store, unfortunately, because I'd like to update it. But somehow been able to move it from iPad to iPad, and it allows me to have different colors of index cards. And so I write every character's point of view in a different color, and then I can figure out. Sorry, I can figure out whose point of view I need to be in with each scene. And so, I can see, like, when I'm trying to figure out what scene goes in what order, if I've done many scenes that are pink or purple or whatever color I assign to different characters, I need to throw in a green one, or I need to throw in, like, if I want to write scenes about the two sisters, I might put that white so that I know it's that subplot. And it really helps me to see the colors laid out on my iPad screen.
And then make sure you're balancing.
Right. I have
Yeah.
friends. I actually learned that lesson from the fabulous Susan Mallory, who actually does it. Well, I don't know if she still does this, but when we used to plot together years ago, she does it on actual index cards, and then she lays them out on the floor, different color index cards for each sort of plot line and each
Mhm.
subplot. And then she lays them out on the floor and figures out what needs to come next, and she puts them in order. And then every day she just takes out a card and knows what scene she needs to write and who it is and what the goal, motivation, and conflict is. And so that has really been helpful to me in my career.
Yeah. So it's like Uno, which the goal is to get to one card and just card, right?
One card and then you're done. Then you can put it away.
That's
Get on to the next
whittle
game.
your way down. All right, well, let's take a little bit of a look back at some of your previous books. Are there characters in your earlier books that fans still bring up to you that they love to talk about?
There are, and it's very tough for me as a writer because once I'm done with the book, I have a hard time remembering the characters' names or things like that. So I've had a couple of series that I think have really resonated with my readers, and it's mainly they like my standalone books, which I've done lots of standalone books, but they really like the interconnected books. And so, I have a series called Hope's Crossing, and it's like 7 books, and a reader still asks me about the characters and what they're doing now. And I'm like, I don't know. I can't remember who that is. I don't know if they had a baby. I don't remember. And I have to, really remind myself because that was, 10 years ago that I wrote those books. I have another one called the Haven Point books, and I never thought I would go back to that. I finished it some years ago, never thought I would go back. And then a few years ago, I ended up revisiting this town to write a Christmas book. And that was really fun for me to go back through and get to know all those characters myself. As far as one that I would say readers consistently talk to me about, no, there's a lot of different ones that
Yeah.
they bring up to me in their letters. And I love that. I love the idea that I have if a reader stumbles onto me now, I have a huge backlist. They can go back and discover all these other books that I wrote a long time ago that I still think have a lot to give to readers.
Mhm. Yeah, well, and I guess it doesn't live in your head the way that it lives in a reader's head, where these people are still alive and continuing on living their life. So what the heck are they up to, right? Which
Well, yeah,
is
and their story is current to that reader right now because they just read it, whereas I
right.
wrote it 10 years ago and maybe have looked at it here and there for promotional things or if I'm writing continuing characters or something like that, but it's done once it's done for me and it's okay, but
Yeah, but I imagine that would be a very lovely experience to have somebody say, well, what are they up to these days?
it's really lovely, and I often have to go back and reacquaint myself with the storyline so I can say, "Oh yes, here's where they were." And it's when I'm writing. One of the reasons I write in series is because I hate to say goodbye to these characters, so I can bring them back to say, something this happened now, and they bought a house or they just got married 2 books later or something like that in the series. So that's one reason I like to write continuing series so that I personally can revisit these characters that I love so much. And I think that helps readers as well because they like to revisit these different people.
Well, yeah. And so you mentioned bringing the one back and writing a Christmas book. Are there others that you think you would ever revisit and write another sequel or a little update on their lives?
I would love to. I mean, I'd love to write a sequel to every single book that I've written at some point because it's never quite the book I imagined it would be. And there's always things I think
Mhm.
afterward. Oh, I wish I'd taken that story that particular route. But I don't know. Right now, I finished writing in Haven Point, but I'm doing a series in the town next to Haven Point. So I'm able to kind of refer to some of the things that I created for that series. So that's been really fun. I don't really bring up the characters very often, but just the idea of the town and the setting and the scenery and things like that.
And you know they're there.
I know they're there. Everybody knows they're there and they're living happily ever after. That's what I always say. Of course they're living happily ever after. Nothing bad ever happens to my characters once I finish the book. They've solved all their problems and their life's
Right.
perfect now.
They never have another lesson to learn. Everything is just smooth sailing, right?
We showed you. I showed you.
Oh, that's too funny. All right, let's do a little bit of rapid fire. You ready?
I
I'm
guess
going
so.
to skip the first one because we already answered plotter or pantser. We're good on that one. So let's just talk favorite time of day to write.
Very early morning. It doesn't happen very often, but that's my favorite time. My most productive time, unfortunately, is night. I get more done in an hour at night than I do 2 or 3 hours because I don't have to deal with phone calls and emails and all the other things.
Right. Coffee or tea?
Really neither. I'm not much of a drinker for either one. I have water most of the time, or I like flavored electrolyte water, things like that.
Hmm. Book you've reread the most?
The book I've reread the most would probably be Pride and Prejudice.
Oh, I've read that one a lot myself. Dream writing location.
The beach in Hawaii probably would be really nice.
Who wouldn't love that, right? What's your favorite book?
My favorite book that I've read or that I've written.
Let's do red first.
Okay. Favorite book that I've read. So hard because I discover a new one every single time. So I don't know that I could say one. Anything by Julianne Long, I love her books. Anything by Mary Bellog, I love her books. J.D. Robb, I love her books. So there's a new one every single time I sit down to read. I think, oh, that's my favorite one now.
Your favorite one today, right?
Yeah, favorite one today.
Okay, so probably similar answer. Favorite author today.
Um, All-time favorite would be Nora Roberts, J.D. Robb.
Mhm. All right, now, favorite book you've written.
Favorite book I've written is probably, well, I would have to say The Lost Book of First Loves. That's usually the one when people ask me that question, it's usually the one that's out and that I'm
Mhm.
done with and I don't have to do any edits on anymore because it's out in the world.
Love it. And which do you have a least favorite book that you've written?
there are a few early in my career that I will never, I have the rights to like one of them. Well, I have rights to five of them. One of them I will never see the light of day again. I'm putting that one away forever. There are a couple other ones that they're not books that I would have written today. That it was just, 30 years ago. It was a
Mhm.
different mood and different things that I wrote at that time that I
Right.
hope
Product of the
the
time
light
and the
of
place.
day again.
Yeah. Do you have a favorite character that you have written?
Um, I like to write the older people for some reason. I like the older
Mhm.
guys. I love writing old men who are just so sweet and cuddly and warm and kind to people. So there was one in my Hopes Crossing series. His name was Harry Lang, and he was this curmudgeon, and I really liked writing his character. And then the other one is the father of a lot of the characters that were in Hopes Crossing and sort of transitioned over to Haven Point, and his name is Dermot Kane, and he became a great favorite of mine as well.
Do you have a character, like a deplorable character that you've written that you really just can't stand?
I did in Hope's Crossing, and then I turned her into a heroine. So
Evolution.
that was a tough challenge. But for the first three or four books in that series, I absolutely detested this person. She was this self-entitled rich girl who made the whole town sort of jump to her whim as she was getting married, and it was the big wedding of the year, and she made everybody work really hard. And then her wedding imploded for reasons before she got married, and then I thought I could make her a heroine, and it was really tough, but that actually became one of my personal favorite books. It's Christmas at Snowflake Canyon.
Love it. That's a great story. Do you have a character, either yours or someone else's, that you would love to meet in real life?
I'd love to meet Eve Dallas from J.D. Rowe's
Hmm.
books, and Rourke, of course. I'd love to meet Rourke.
Who wouldn't love to meet an Irishman,
Billionaire.
hero, right? Yeah,
A
exactly.
good billionaire, let's just say a good billionaire.
Well, I'm sure he's a billionaire at this point. What's your favorite hobby?
I like to bead. That came from writing a book series about beading. I didn't ever do that before. I love to read. I love to hike in the mountains. So I couldn't really say one particular favorite.
Yeah, three very different attitudes when doing each of those, right? What's your most hated chore?
I hate cleaning my bathrooms. I let somebody else do that if I can, anytime.
I love it. When all the kids were home and I had a chore chart, those were assigned out.
My least favorite.
What's one thing fans might not know about you?
That I love to travel, to have travel adventures. They probably know a little bit about that because I do post that. I don't travel as often as I'd like, but those travel experiences are among my favorite memories. And so I'm very much a travel hog. And now I watch like travel YouTube videos constantly, which came into play in this book because Xander, that one of the heroes, is a travel vlogger. That's what he does. He has a YouTube channel with travel. So that sort of came into one of my passions. I put it into the book.
Love that too. So what is next up for you? Any sneak peeks that you can share with us?
Well, my next book is called Snow Kissed, and it comes out in October. And it is another book in my Shelter Spring series. So I'm actually back writing a series. This is the third book in that series. Basically Christmas themed. Every book is Christmas themed or holiday themed anyway. And it's a story about one of the sisters that I introduced in the previous books. And she's now a single mom of a little girl with Down syndrome. And it's kind of her journey to say, I'm willing to try again, even though my husband left me and left our situation. I'm willing to open my heart again to someone else.
And so October is the release date for that book. So we can talk about that more in our next interview. But in the meantime, tell everyone where your readers can find you and follow your work. So I imagine your website is the best place to visit Rayanne Thane, right? So your website is
RayanneThane.com, and I have links there to all my social properties. So I'm very active on Facebook. I'm kind of active on Instagram, trying to dip my toe into TikTok a little bit more. But I'm Rayanne Thane basically everywhere. You can find me if you search for that. I
yeah,
also have a book group that meets once a month, and you can look for Rayanne Thane's book group. And I usually interview other authors, and we talk for an hour, and it's really fun.
very good. So any final message to your fans or new or long-term readers? What would you like to leave them with?
Just the idea that things might be hard right now in your life. Things might be, challenging, and you might not think you can make it through, but I hope you find a little bit of inspiration from characters that I've written who have struggled with hard things and made it through to the other side. You can get through this. It might not be right now, but it will eventually come.
Absolutely. So if you have not done it yet, pick up The Lost Book of First Loves. You can find all of the links on rayandthane.com. And we will be back with another episode to talk soon about more about this book and upcoming Christmas book and everything and anything and everything writing with Raeann Thane. So, Raeann, thank you so much for this conversation. This has been such fun.
It's a delight. Thank you so much.
All right, we'll talk soon.
Okay.